Good morning. We'll start with the preface to the Lyrical Ballads by Wordsworth, its introduction, and the chief characteristics or the significance of the preface. The preface, its genesis and history, how it started initially. So, the Wordsworth's preface to the Lyrical Ballads is a capital document of very abiding significance. It has underwent a number of revisions till it acquired its present form, which we are going through. The Lyrical Ballads was first published in 1798, and to this edition, Wordsworth merely added a short advertisement or introduction. In this, the poet modestly pointed out that his poems were in the nature of experiment, and to find out whether themes taken from humble and common life and composed in the language of real people are really suitable for poetry. He has also attacked the artificial diction of contemporary poetry. In the second edition of the Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1800, he added a more detailed preface. He began writing it in the summer of 1800 and completed it by the end of September. Coleridge claimed in 1802 that it was half a child of my own brain, since many of its ideas had originated in discussions between the two poets, and he may have even given further help by making notes on those topics. But nevertheless, it was Wordsworth who finally shaped this material, and in doing so, he assimilated it to his own way of thinking. The 1800 preface was revised, enlarged, and perfected for the 1802 edition of the Lyrical Ballads. Therefore, the most significant addition to the 1802 preface is the long account of the nature, qualifications, and functions of a poet, the demonstration of his superiority over the man of science, and an examination of the nature of poetic pleasure. The preface was constantly revised and perfected for each subsequent addition to the Lyrical Ballads. But basically, the poet's views remained the same. No significant changes can be seen or made in the coming editions. The preface that we study today is that of 1802. Next is the aims and objectives of the preface. Wordsworth himself has written that his aim was, in writing the preface, was to give an elaborate account of his theory of poetry, or to make a systematic defense of his own point of view. He fully realized that systematic, elaborate discussion of his theory is not possible within the brief compass of a preface. That was why he was averse to writing a preface. The first edition of his poems had only a brief advertisement, and it was only at the insistence and advice of his friends that he added the preface to the second edition of his poems. He did so because he felt that his poems were of a new kind, both in theme and style, and therefore he should not burden the people without a word of introduction. He therefore added the preface as an introduction, explaining the ways in which his poems were different from the poetry of other people who were popular in his period or who were contemporary to him. Every new and original poet has to create the taste by which he is read and enjoyed, and the creation of such a taste was Wordsworth's basic objective in writing the preface. The preface contains Wordsworth's views on the nature of poetry and the poetic process, the function of poetry, the qualifications of a poet, main theme of the Lyrical Ballads. The theme that dominates the preface which Wordsworth pursues most consistently, is his argument against poetic diction. Wordsworth is arguing against a positive theory of poetic diction, which was very popular in the 18th century. The belief not only that some modes of diction were best avoided in poetry, but that some modes were specially suitable for poetry. Therefore, the poet might write reddening Phoebus instead of rising sun, and green attire for grass, with no particular intention but that of increasing the elegance of his lines, and such elegance was considered desirable. This theory in practice fell into discredit during the early 19th century, partly because of Wordsworth's growing prestige and influence. Wordsworth's fundamental objection to what he has written was towards vague, glossy and unfeeling language, which has to be separated from poetry, from ordinary speech of human life. Poetry as communication. For him, the great value of poetry is that permits the sharing of experience, the communication of truths, carried alive into the heart by passion. Characteristically, he compares poetry with prose, therefore emphasizing its communicative power, and does not draw the traditional parallel with painting, which emphasizes its aesthetic qualities. As an example of poetic diction, he chooses a sonnet by poet Gray, which expresses very little but resembles, one might say, a small decorous monument. The view of poetry as communication is not confined to one period or movement, but it has never been so forcefully expressed as in great passage Wordsworth added in 1802, which foreshadows his earlier sentence. Quote, "Poetry sheds no tears such as angels weep, but natural and human tears. She cannot boast of no celestial ichor, that is, fluid that distinguishes her vital juices from those of prose. The same human blood circulates through the veins of them both." Unquote. So, there was also criticism of Wordsworth's theory. Wordsworth had argued against poetic diction very forcefully. His phrase, "the real language of men," sidetracks important questions, and by using the word language synonymously with diction, obscures the fact that language involves the organization as well as the choice of words. Moreover, he runs some risk of setting up an opposite but equally false standard for poetry, whereby none but commonplace words shall be used. His theoretical preference for the language as well as the themes of low and rustic life owes something to the contemporary tendency to idealize peasants, savages, and others who might have escaped the corrupting influence of civilization. A common modern view regarding this would be that no words are in themselves either specially fit or specially unfit for poetry, and that they must be judged solely by their effectiveness where they occur. Next is the themes of poetry. Wordsworth's view of the nature and function of poetry and the process of poetic creation was of equal interest and significance. Wordsworth's views of the scope of poetry is even less restricted than his view of its language. It is the honorable characteristic of poetry, he wrote in 1798, that its materials are to be found in every subject which can interest the human mind, and this attitude underlies the whole preface. Means that you can find the material for poetry anywhere around you. Several passages of 1800 can be seen as amplifications of the same idea. For example, the statement that, quote, "the feeling gives importance to the action and situation and not the action and situation to the feeling, unquotes. Therefore, subjects no more than words are poetic or unpoetic in themselves. A small incident of a village life may be material, not merely for verse of the pastoral or burlesque kind, but for serious poetry, if the poet can make it meaningful. Next is poetry as a complement to science. In 1802, Wordsworth extends his own theory of poetry into the future in a striking passage which foresees the possible transformation of man's environment by science. He writes that scientific matters cannot now be brought into poetry simply because they are not generally understood and will become available for the poet's use, and by using them the poet will help other men to become more fully and imaginatively aware of them. Since 1800, science has of course both transformed our environment and provided material for many poems. In this way, does Wordsworth seek to extend the scope of poetry by bringing within its folds themes chosen from humble and common life as well as from the sphere of science? The preface is therefore seen to be a forceful plea for simplicity both in theme and treatment. Thank you. We'll continue with the other half of this topic in our next lecture.